Everybody listen to We're Not Wizards, because we are the best, and we're not wizards, no matter what anybody says. Goodbye.
Welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for June. It's June already. Who'd have thought? We are almost halfway through the year. Who could believe it? Now, as you remember, way back in December, I can't even remember because I almost called it September. That's absolutely ridiculous. But I ran a Kickstarter campaign, and there was a tier where people had the chance to actually come onto the show and talk about anything at all that we wanted. So far we've had a couple of people on doing that. We've now got somebody else who's wonderful and fantastic, and that person is Kai Herbertz from Herbertz Entertainment, and he is here to talk about, it's a game that is so fantastic and so wonderful that even trying to pronounce its name will bring stardust into your life. It's called the Albedo, or it could be the Albedo. It could be Yggdrasil. It could be something else completely different. But as I say, I've got Kai Herbertz from Herbertz Entertainment. Hello, sir. How are you? Are you well?
Hello, Richard. Thank you. Yes, I'm well. And how are you? I hope you're well as well.
I had this horrific realisation that before we had to talk, I was reminded rather gently by my better half, and they said that you remember that we have we've got our lawn, our grass at the front of the house is a state. It's full of weeds. And reminded that they're coming tomorrow, but what they were going to do is they're going to be removing some of the topsoil. So in order to do that, they have to make sure that the grass is as short as possible. So basically, roughly about 10 minutes before we started talking, I was dashing about with a lawnmower like a madman. So I'm now probably a bit green and certainly a bit tired. But apart from that, I'm very, very good indeed. How about yourself? Are you well?
I'm well, but I just imagine like one house over, there is another podcast and they just have this lawnmower recording now.
I know. They're going to have to put the noise reduction on so they can kind of take me away from kind of like, yeah, I'm going to be getting cursed on some other podcast kind of somewhere else. This person, they can't, and I mean, it's not like I was doing it at like a reasonable time of the evening. I was doing it like at 9 o'clock at night. So I'm surprised I didn't get somebody kind of leaning out the window and shouting at me, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, on here it's only on Sundays that people are really complaining if you do that, but otherwise I think it's fine.
Because you're where are you based? Are you in Germany? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm on the continent, so in Düsseldorf. Actually, It's like 30 kilometers, so half an hour drive from Essen, where the big games fair is held. So I'm in this very fortunate position that whenever there's a games fair and I have a booth, I can just drive there and have no problem with hotel accommodation or anything like that.
Well, you can just drive home at the end of the day, can't you? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
You just pack up. In fact, if the mood takes you, you could probably just go home for lunch. if you really,
well, not quite.
Kind of, well, you know.
But it's a blessing and a curse because that way I also miss out on all the after show banter and people getting together to play games and that sort of thing. So that's always a little bit. I'm a little bit sad about it, but I kind of have that at UK Games Expo, for instance.
Yeah, I suppose it's Yeah, I suppose you get that if you're staying away from home. If you are only kind of like just along the road, it's really, really difficult to say, well, I need to get as much out of this day as possible because it's going to take me, ages to kind of drive back. Do you go to Essen on a regular basis? I mean, are you a regular kind of attender to Essen?
I've attended as just a visitor, so just interested in the board game hobby since I'm not entirely sure, something like 1995, and I've only missed it 2 years when there were things going on in my life where I couldn't make it. So, for instance, I was actually living in the UK for a while, and then I couldn't justify flying over for that. And I've been an exhibitor for, I can't remember, 3 or 4 years. So 2016 I started with my booth at Essen. So yeah, I had the booth 3 years in a row, and this year will be the 4th year. And with UK Games Expo, I was an exhibitor in 2017 and 2018. And the fair just wrapped up, and this time I only flew in on Friday the 31st of May.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Ah, right. Okay. One of the things, obviously, it's your show, so it's your night, so you're allowed to obviously talk about anything that you want, but there's obviously a little bit of history, because you mentioned staying in the UK for a while. Was that to do with kind of education? Was that to do with your job?
Yeah, it was education. Yeah, so basically I went to, after school, we have this mandatory military service, unless you say I can't go to the military for reason of conscience. And so I actually did this other year. So you don't get to do whatever you want. You still have to do something for the state. So I was at a hospital doing stuff there. And then afterwards, I went to university in a city called Aachen, which is a very nice place for tourists, but it's a very bleak and dreary place to live. So afterwards, I was ready for something new, something fresh, and then I decided to do a PhD in London, and I went to Imperial College London.
All right,
and it was really quite an awesome experience because, New York has this image of being the melting pot and people from all over go there. But I think that's not the case anymore because everybody in New York is like 2nd or 3rd generation American. Whereas in London, you really do have people from all over the world coming together and they stay for 3-4 years. And then they go home again, or maybe they stay, but most people, I think, go there with a specific purpose in mind, and then they go back again. And so there was this, and you also have many, many tourists. So it was really a marvelous experience.
What did you do your PhD in?
Okay. So I studied electrical engineering, and the topic was on metamaterial or electromagnetic bandgap filters. So at the time, metamaterials were this really interesting topic. So Sir John Pendry, also at Imperial College, but in the physics department, not at electrical engineering, he was in the media, in the press, and said, with metamaterials we can build a Harry Potter-esque cloaking device, and in 5 years I'm going to have something like that. And so everybody jumped on that and said, "Oh, we need to race to invent this." And this is a very ambitious thing. So instead, I went on this filter route instead, which was a bit more attainable, let's say. And that was basically what I was researching at the time. And then afterwards, it was really difficult to find a job because there are not many tech companies in London. It's all banking, and a lot of my peers went into banking. But at that time, this Lehman Brothers stuff happened, and so banking wasn't really a viable option either. And then I cast a wider net and ended up back in Germany. And ironically, a lot of people who still stayed in engineering went to Germany with me.
So what is it you do now? Are you still staying in? Are you still in the kind of the similar kind of field to what you're studying? Are you kind of like an engineer kind of in general then?
I did that for a while. So when I went back in 2011, I worked at the Fraunhofer Institute in Wachtberg, which is like a small town 20 kilometers south of Bonn.
Yes.
And Fraunhofer, the Fraunhofer Society itself is world famous for inventing MP3. But I wasn't in the audio department. I was in a radar institute, and they said, "Oh, we are actually having some metamaterial projects here to improve a radar," and so my expertise fit quite well, and so they hired me. But last year, so December 2018, I decided that my company is starting to slowly take off. So, and my it was temporary contracts anyway. Contracts ran out, projects wrapped up, and my company was doing moderately well. So I said, okay, I need to see if I can build up my company. So maybe it's a good point to part ways here. And so that's kind of what I'm doing, but it's still part-time.
And is this you doing kind of like the are you still doing stuff in the similar field, or are you talking more about the kind of the board game tabletop side of things?
Yeah. And the company is not a science company. It's a board game company that I started in 2016,
right.
or rather, it's a general. I started it as a general entertainment company because I wrote a book, and then I did an anthology, so like a short story collection with many authors, and because whenever there's other people involved, you never know if there's some disagreement down the line, and then I thought, okay, if somebody wants to sue me for $1 billion, then it's not good if I'm liable, so I need a company, so that in the worst case the company is bankrupt. But because I had this general entertainment company, then I could finally pursue also my board game projects, which I've been working on for many decades, but never really made the plunge to actually go to Essen and say, here I am, and these are my games. So that's what I did in 2016.
Let's talk about your book. Because I'm always interested in people who are generally creative anyway. You know, I am a great believer in speaking to people who, in general, are creative, and you know, it's speaking not always necessarily to kind of completely concentrate on the kind of the board game side of things. I mean, what's the story behind the book? The book itself is called Age of Torridon. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
What's the story behind that? I mean, how long were you writing that for, putting that together? I mean, what's the kind of the story behind how Age of Torridon kind of came about?
So I started writing that in, I think, 2008 or something like that. But I'm saying writing, and I'm using the term very loosely, because at that time, what I would do is I would write a page, and then I would basically say, this is rubbish, and just crumple the page, throw it away, and not touch it for another year or so. And during the PhD, actually, normally you don't really have that much spare time, but just as a creative outlet and to offset the research work, I decided to, whenever I did have a minute, to just continue working on this novel. And I didn't really finish it then, so especially since when the stress of the PhD picked up, I had to shelve it again. But I made some solid headway there and got about like 25,000 words down.
Wow.
When I came back to Germany, I started to meet up with my best friend, who was in the UK when I wasn't in the UK, and then he came back, and then I went, and so basically we were both in the same town again at that time, and so we started meeting up at the local library here, and every Saturday. And so he was working on his poetry, and I was working on my novel, and eventually with that consistent, at least weekly effort over the years, it finally came together. So that's kind of how it went roughly. There was another like inciting incident where I was meeting up with some people from yet a different community. Like there's this game called StarCraft, and then StarCraft 2.
Yeah.
So you know that. And there's in that realm there's a prominent figure, Sean Plott, Day 9. I don't know if you know him. So he was a pro gamer, and then he did commentary, and then he did his Day 9 daily, where he was talking about the deeper strategy of the game. So an online show that he was streaming. And anyway, people from his community said, "Oh, let's all meet up." And this was in the US, and so I said, "Okay, I've not really had a long holiday in the US in a while." So let's go there. Let's meet up, and while I'm there, just drive around California and see the USA a bit. And anyway, so he said, "Oh, you're all coming here. Okay, I'm meeting up with you guys for a Korean barbecue." And then he asked me, "Oh, so what are you doing?" And so I mentioned the book, and then he said, "Oh yeah, when you're done, let me read the book." And so I thought this was just a polite figure of speech. So I just said, yeah, of course, yeah. And then he mentioned later on, he said, "Yeah, but seriously, if you have the book finished, then just send it over." And then he, after we finished dinner and we were leaving, he said it again. And so I said, "Okay, this is the magic rule of 3." So he said it 3 times. So now it's serious. And then it was also serious for me. So then I said, "Oh, I need to finish this book now." So I actually sat down and got it ready. And at some event the next year, I met him again. And he said, "Oh, what about this book?" And I said, "Oh, I'm so glad you remembered. Here it is." And so I gave him a copy of the book. So that was kind of the kick in the butt that I needed. But it's compared to board games, I cannot necessarily recommend it, because writing a book is a lot of work, and it's not as fun work. With game design, you can play your games, and that's typically at some point it's fun. Whereas with the book, it's or maybe it's for me, it's a very it's really strenuous work. So, and I'm particularly because I was so slow with it, so I'm not sure. At some point I'm going to write something again, but this is more of a hobby than a career thing.
Did you find you were kind of overly critical when you were writing? I mean, were you likely to kind of like write a couple of pages and then, as you say, kind of go back and delete entire paragraphs and then kind of start again because you didn't feel it was kind of flowing together and things?
That's initially what happened, but I think there's a bit of this Dunning-Kruger stuff going on as well, where if you're not an expert, then you think, this is amazing, because whenever I read my stuff, I think, this is really good. But I then if I with some focus, you can really see that it's not expert level. So it's still I'm still proud of it. Let's say it that way. But I also see that I have a lot to improve for other novels.
I think it comes down to one of these things that if you've actually finished your book, regardless, I guess, of how it kind of turns out, at least you've done a lot more than a lot of people that have done. Because I know, there's always a lot of people that get halfway into a book or a quarter of a way into the book or the first 10 pages, and then they kind of, they kind of forget all about it and they kind of give up. And there's an awful lot of work that goes into writing stuff, because it's not like, it's kind of strange, because a book can act almost like a kind of a board game with its mechanics, that if you go and you're editing your book and you end up changing a section of that book, it can have ramifications for what you have to do later on in the book. You sometimes it has a major effect on the plot, where you're taking the story, what can happen with the characters, where I can see why game design is just a case of I guess with game design, it's very, very easy to have something up and running quite quickly. If I'm looking at, say, if I'm looking at Albedo, there's a lot of artwork on the cards there, but I'm guessing to kind of get the primary edition of the game, the first edition of the game up and running, you would have been fine with a deck of kind of playing cards with some numbers written in the corner, basically, and some notes on it, I'm guessing.
Yes, correct. This is the game design angle is quite interesting to me, because initially when I started out, I made these really big, sprawling, complicated games, and they never really survived the playtesting stage. And so my first game that I sold at Essen, which was about disaster mitigation, and also now Albedo as the second game with its expansions, I basically started with a simple game and then made it even simpler. And the advantage is, so both are basically card games. So Albedo is a card game and it plays in like 35 minutes. And the advantage is that if you have a group of playtesters and you play a game, the first time you play it, it's not good, because if it's just a theoretical construct, you're thinking, this might be cool, and then you play it and you realize, actually this doesn't work and that doesn't work, but I know how to fix it. Then with a 30-minute card game, you can do that. You can just take a pencil and quickly change the cards, and then everybody is ready to go again. If you have a 3-hour game, then it's a really hard sell to say, guys, we didn't have fun for 3 hours. Let's have not fun for 3 hours again. And so all my complicated games,
lose friends that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Lose a lot of friends.
So that's a bit tricky, and I'm still working on some more complicated games, but they're a little bit elusive. But I'll get there. I need to level up as a game designer a bit, and then I think I can get to the complicated games.
Yeah, but again, you've got you released you've got Albedo out there. You've got, is it I'm going to really murder the pronunciation of this, and I beg forgiveness before, but is Das Katastrophenspiel?
Yeah,
which
correct.
was the first game that you, yay!
Yeah, and if you look at that, it looks a bit prototypey, but that was one of these things where you just have to get it out, because I recently found an old drawer of mine where there were some notes from my brother, and in the notes it said, we have this pirate game and we want to release it for Spiel at Essen Spiel 2005. And that never happened.
Wow.
But so I recently found that again, snapped a photo of it, sent it to him, and said, "What's up with that? You're a little bit late. When can I expect the game?" And so he wrote back like, "Haha, yeah. Where did you find that?" But it's kind of like that, because I've been doing this for quite a long time, but never really pushed through. It's kind of like what you said about the novels, that you write like 25% or half a novel and then you put it away again. And it kind of like worked like that with my games until in 2016 I said, okay, I'm now going to get a booth at Essen, and either I'm going to have a decent game that my playtesters like, or I'm just going to sit there on a folding chair with an empty booth and everybody is going to mock me. And I think these hard deadlines really get your creativity going. It's kind of like when Sean Plott said, "Oh, I want to read your book," and let's buckle down and get the book done. And likewise, when I had the commitment that I had the booth, I needed to finish one of my games. And it was a little bit serendipity because my other game was this complicated one again, and I couldn't get it to work. We were playing it and it just didn't click. And this one was just a little side idea I had about disaster mitigation, and then we managed to play it again and again and again until with many iterations it was okay. So
how did you actually get into the hobby in the first place? I mean, were you exposed to quite heavier games from a kind of a younger age?
Yes.
Or yeah.
So what happened was that my earliest memory of a game is one that is called, in German it's called Verlies, and it actually has a really nice cover that is apparently a little bit nicked from some movie. There's on Board Game Geek there's a photo about that. But anyway, it's actually a famous game. It's called Dungeon by Gary Gygax, I think.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But the German version came up with these ridiculous monster names, so it made more like a satire, like a spoof game. Because there was the crooked nose wolf spider and nonsense monsters like that. So really charming, funny, fluffy stuff. And so we had that game when I was a kid. It must have been sometime in the 80s. So we played that and we were like, oh, this is amazing. Let's see if they have something like this in the stores. And so they had Das Schwarze Auge, which is kind of like a role-playing game, heavily influenced by the early Dungeons and Dragons stuff, but kind of with this Norse mythology, Germanic kind of influence. And so we bought that, and we opened the box. It was a box, and it cost 30 marks, so quite expensive for kids back then. And we got it home. We opened the box, and there's just 2 books in it. There's no playing board. And what is this? This is rubbish. Let's take it back to the shop. This is not. But then we actually looked at the books and then got into role playing games for a bit. Yeah. But at some point, role playing games really take a lot of time and effort from everybody involved. So the DM needs to prepare the adventure and think about non-player characters, and it's a lot of almost acting. And so at some point it was really difficult to get everybody on board with that and meet up for that. So we actually returned to board games, and then we went in the 90s, we went to Essen, and it was just fantastic because there were so many. This was before the internet, basically. So the internet existed, but nobody had it really. There were all these game companies from all over the world. Like there was Australian Design Group, and you get all these American games, the Axis and Allies and stuff like that. There was from the UK. There was the Games Workshop stuff, and it was just a fantastic experience. And I spent a lot of money that first Games Fair. Had my friends carry bags of stuff, and that was a really good experience, and so that's how I kind of got into the hobby.
When you were staying over kind of in the UK, were you aware that the hobby maybe wasn't as big as it was in kind of Germany at the time, or when you were staying in the UK, were you starting to see kind of more of, you know, what we would kind of call the kind of the tabletop kind of hobby, your Catans and things like that, Carcassonne's kind of out there. Was the hobby as well known where you were in the UK as it was kind of back home in Germany?
Yeah, that was already after the whole Catan craze. So Catan came about when I was at university in Germany. And this is a thing, I have to say, Catan, I still think it's a great game. Nowadays, people scoff at it and go like, it's like Monopoly, blah, blah, blah. But I really think it's a fantastic game because of so many design points where you have this trading aspect, which can be a bit annoying, but the trading at least gets everybody involved. So you're not just sitting around waiting for everybody else to finish their turn. You can make an offer and say, I will give you, for your 2 sheep, I will give you 1 ore. And then people say, what? Just 1 card? Blah, blah, blah. And that is fantastic. And even if you have to wait, if everybody says, okay, I'm done trading with you, we're not making any more deals with you, then the turns are so short that it's your turn soon again. And there are so many modern design principles in Catan that I haven't played it in ages, but I still, at least I believe I would still have fun with it. But yeah, when I was in the UK, we actually already had modern kind of games. Like I did buy at Forbidden Planet. Maybe I'm not allowed to say. Sorry, there are other shops, and it's not an ad. So there are many shops that sell stuff.
Fine. It's fine. You've mentioned Games Workshop anyway. So
yeah, exactly.
Planet, we might as well. You know, it's not like we're going to get into trouble. There are other shops available, but you know, Forbidden Planet's quite nice. So there you go.
Yeah. So I was there and I bought Battlestar Galactica and all the expansions, and so I played that when I was in the UK. And this is the thing, I do like to have the original version of the game because translations are typically not that good, and also I know so many people from my time in the UK that I like to have games that I can actually play with people. Although my core group here is they're all German, so it wouldn't matter. But I do like the originals.
So do you prefer then to have an English version of the game as opposed to, unless it's been developed at the same time, would you prefer to have the original kind of vanilla English version of the game as opposed to a later on kind of German translation? Is there kind of differences within kind of the translations that can make a difference to the game and the mechanics itself?
Well, I think it's a funny thing. Whenever I experience anything for the first time in a certain way, I prefer that. So, for instance, King of Tokyo, I actually have the German version, and sorry, the expansions I have in English. So, first of all, it's a mix of stuff. I don't like that, but I can't help it in this case. But now in King of Tokyo, there's a card that is called Armageddon in the German version, and it's called Total Destruction in the English version. And personally, I prefer to be called Armageddon because I think that is a lot more powerful. But I'm wondering, do I prefer it because this is like how I experienced the card for the first time, or do I prefer it because it really is better? And it's likewise for any media. So Star Wars I've seen in German first, and Die Hard is actually better in the German dub than in the original. But
that's a strong claim, Kai.
It is. But I can almost rationalize that because in Die Hard, in the original, it's the German terrorists, and Alan Rickman clearly is not German. So and his name in the movie is Hans Gruber, and Hans is also like, it's such a cliche name. Whereas in the German dub,
Yeah.
In the German dub, it's the European terrorists. And so Alan Rickman's character is called Jack. So, and there's this guy with the stubble and the dark hair.
Yeah.
And he's in the German dub, he's an Italian with an Italian accent. So it's a really good and funny movie, and I watched then the original, which is just gritty and too serious for its own good. So I prefer the goofy, light-hearted stuff that the translators did in the German dub.
Did they change the script then for some
they
parts
did,
of it?
Yeah, of course.
Really?
They had to. Yeah, because when he's in the elevator and he's silently recording that their names are Hans and Karl, that doesn't fit because they gave them new names. And so in the German version, he's saying, I'll just give you a few funny nicknames here, Hans and Karl, just like two giants from this old fairy tale. And so there's invented nonsense dialogue in the movie that, and instead of mother bleep bleep, he's saying Schweinebacke, so like pig cheek, which is not really an insult. And it just was something that these guys came up with, and I've heard it for the first time there in this movie, but it just fit very well. And so, as I said, it's more like an action comedy in the German dub, whereas in the original it's a serious action movie.
So what you're saying is that the Die Hard version, the German version, is the superior, the best version. And
Definitely.
everybody that comes up and says, "Oh, Die Hard's on, it's the ultimate Christmas movie," you're sitting there going, "You think you know Die Hard, but I know Die Hard so much better."
Yeah, but I have to be very lenient and forgiving, because these people are right. It is the best Christmas movie.
But the German version is ever so slightly the betterer version.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think they should. What they should do is they should take the German version and put subtitles on it, and then show it in the UK and in the US that way.
I wonder if that actually exists. That would be absolutely awesome.
That would
if
be
that
hilarious,
existed,
but
that I'd need to actually see if that actually exists. There's bound to be the German dub of the film, which has got English subtitles. There has to be. It has to kind of exist as well. Is there any? I mean, this is fascinating. Is there any other kind of films of note that you've noticed a massive difference?
yeah, Star Wars.
Really?
The initial Star Wars. So there are a few dialogue lines that don't exist in the original. So there's a scene in the cantina in the first movie where Luke just pulls the sleeve of the bartender, and then the bartender wordlessly puts something to drink in front of him. And in the German version, he actually says, "Hey buddy, you got one for me?" And then he puts in his drink. And there's some more stuff there, but I'm blanking on it. But there's several instances in Star Wars where there's dialogue that didn't exist in the original. And of course, this is I can't say it, but anyway, it's
no. Say it.
So you have. Okay, I have to word this carefully, otherwise I will get lynched. So in Star Wars, you have actors, a lot of actors that are a bit green. They are new, and and you can tell that they are not seasoned actors. But in a dub, you have professional voice actors. So the dub automatically is increasing the value of the product in that way. But it's.
You said Mark Hamill's rubbish. Then is this what you're saying? Are you saying Mark Hamill in the original Star Wars was a rubbish actor?
No, of course not. No. But anyway. The thing is about Star Wars. This is so I'm bringing it back to what I said originally before I really get lynched. It's always for me a matter of where I see it for the first time. If I had seen Star Wars in the English version, in the original, I probably would have liked the original a lot better. And and so nowadays I actually go out of my way to see, for instance, all the Marvel stuff I've seen in the original version, because I don't want to see the dub. I don't want to be the dub to be the first impression, because I want to have the original experience.
I'm kind of intrigued to know. I'm really, really intrigued to know if the Star Wars prequels actually get better in any way, shape, or form in the kind of the German dubbed version, or
Well,
if they're universally quite poor
It's
in the kind of
okay,
the dubbed
so
version as well.
let's do this little detour here. So Star Wars Episode 1, you have these Trade Federation guys, and in the original they have a Japanese accent, and in the German version they have a French accent. So that's one change. And
That automatically makes it better.
and yeah.
Oh, please,
but
please tell me that when they realise the Jedi's arrived, they go Zutalor. Zutalor, le Jedi! Please, that would just be...
it's very, very much like that, yeah. So, but I was, these are small differences that I've kind of seen. But I actually like Episode 1, so it's actually, for me, it's a proper Star Wars movie. Whereas the new stuff, I'm thinking, well, it's a nice science fiction movie, but it's not really Star Wars. Does that make sense?
I think it's... Yeah, and because I think Episode 1 was made for people who were, at the time, 20 years younger than me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
the latest ones are made for people who are 30 years younger than me. But I think that the latest ones, The Force Awakens, for instance, I think they did a good job of, they almost rehashed the original Star Wars story and kind of brought it kind of up to date. And I kind of liked it. I guess it was really funny because I think at the time the internet was just trying to really find its feet while Star Wars, the kind of the prequels were kind of being made. So there was the beginnings of things like Ain't It Cool News.com that came out, and there was the Force.net, and they were kind of giving kind of releases and spoilers, and there was speculation and everything like that, and it was really something that was kind of driven an awful lot by the internet, news on the internet that was getting back. Whereas when we were growing up, probably when like Return of the Jedi, there wasn't any information apart from what was on, what was released by Lucasfilm. The studio decided what was available. Nowadays, it's almost like we've got to the point where they actually release fake trailers, or they make amendments to the trailers. They've come out and recently, I don't know if you've seen Endgame, the last kind of...
I did, yeah.
But it's kind of apparent if you go back and look at the trailers, there's a few alterations that they've made to the trailers, and I'm not going to mention the alterations because there's, obviously it's still a fresh film, but there's alterations that they made to the trailers in order to kind of sidestep the audience slightly. So it's almost like we're not releasing you're not getting leaks. It's like we are giving you leaks and we're giving you pictures, but we're kind of controlling the information, and they've got to the point now where they're actually producing and manufacturing almost like false press releases in order to keep everything kind of fresh, but keep the information going, which is kind of pretty cool.
I've heard that was also the case for the original Star Wars, where Mark Hamill didn't know what Darth Vader was saying.
Yeah.
So. And the reveal, I think in his script it was something like Obi-Wan killed your father or something like that, and then he goes like, "Oh," Yeah, and then he found out when he saw the movie. And like, oh, so that's how it actually went.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah. He found out I think it was either when he saw the movie, or I think it was him. Lucas came in and said, right, if you see this, we're only telling you, and you're the only person that knew. And they had to, they actually needed to do the dub and stuff like that, because they used to have, James Earl Jones used to do the voiceover, but they also used to have him standing near the side of the set, kind of reciting his lines so he could get into the spirit of things and stuff like that. And I believe that David Prowse was famous for just not being able to keep his mouth shut. So for scene, so for what they did for the scene was they originally had him saying on the set, Obi-Wan killed your father, kind of thing. And then later on, James Earl Jones, obviously dubbed in the famous line instead. So Mark Hamill said for a while he was the only person, because he said that Harrison Ford kind of got angry with him in a jokey way. But he says, you knew about this, didn't you? He says, why didn't you tell me? Basically, kind of going back. Obviously, there's enough people talking about Star Wars. There's an entire podcast about this. But how many, when it comes to kind of like, you released your first game. Did you self-publish that? Did you go down the Kickstarter route for that, or how did you kind of get that out there for people?
So das Katastrophenspiel, the catastrophe mitigation game,
yes.
I made pretty much every beginner's mistake I could make. So I self-published that, which is not a mistake, but the mistake I made was I didn't get a proper board game manufacturer on board, and instead I did a little self-assembly of different parts. So I had one company print the cards, I had another company print the manual, I had another company print the boxes, and then I had yet another company that got the chits and the meeples, and well, there are no meeples, the pawns, and that stuff. And then all these things arrived and I had to hand assemble them myself. So it was A, messy, it was B, expensive, and C, it was of not matching quality. So the box is super flimsy, and there's a lot of things that I could have avoided if I had the time to go to just one company to get my game produced. And this is what I did with Albedo. So it was a big learning experience. Get artists to produce artwork, and then go to a company. So I went with I'm not sure again if I can say the names on air.
You can say whatever you want. It's all completely fine.
Okay. So basically I queried different companies in China and in India and in Germany and in Poland, and eventually I went with a Polish company called Fabryka Kart. They used to be Treffel, but they kind of split up their game manufacturing company, and where they offer this as a service for other people. And they are very, very, very good. I can really recommend them. So these are the people I've stuck with ever since.
What was it? What was it like? Kind of when you were kind of putting out Albedo, kind of like for the first time. I mean, was the landscape kind of different in terms of getting the kind of the name out there? I mean, I know it was kind of a year ago. Well, it was almost in July that you funded. But have you noticed a change, or have you noticed a change in how Kickstarter's kind of been running since you kind of ran the first campaign?
Well, the Kickstarter was slightly different. Was the Kickstarter for the expansion, because my initial Kickstarter for Albedo actually failed, and then I decided to dig into my savings and still produce the game because I believe in the game, and it was also well received. So I had this situation where I did a small print run just to see how well it goes, and then it was like sold out in 2 days, and people wanted more, and I thought, okay, so there is an interest here. But I didn't really advertise my Kickstarter campaign. So that didn't fund, and I produced the game myself, and then I said, okay, I'm going to do a Kickstarter for an expansion when people know the game exists, and some reviewers have played the game, and they can get the base game as well, because I already have it produced, and then we can get an expansion going. And this went fairly well, and so I'm basically now doing the same thing again, that I'm preparing the second expansion, and I've actually again a little learning experience, because it's so difficult to get a URL to point people to, because the Kickstarter URLs are
they're huge.
Yeah, exactly. So now I had the idea to actually get a short URL myself, and that just forwards to whatever project I'm running at the moment. So
all right, okay.
I'm going to plug that as well. It's forw.de, so kind of like forward, and that forwards to at the moment a timer that is running clock, essentially, once the campaign is live, it might actually be... Is it live? I don't know. Could be live already. Then it's forwarding to the campaign page.
Yeah.
And afterwards, it will be forwarded to my company page again. So that's kind of the idea. But the big problem was that all the good URLs are already taken. Of course, I should have done this 10 years ago. But I was happy that I got a reasonably short URL again for this.
Do you want to tell us about how you actually play Albedo? Because the expansion, for the latest expansion that's going to be coming out, is going to be coming out relatively soon. So for people that are, kind of interested, I mean, will you give them the ability to be able to get the base game as well? Yeah, as part of the campaign.
Yeah, so this time I decided to just have 4 tiers. So the first tier is just the expansion for people who have the game already. Then there is the base game plus the expansion. Then there is the base game plus the first expansion, which was called Space Pirates. And the expansion, and the last tier is 2 times the base game plus both expansions. And the reason why people might want 2 of the base game is actually that one box of Albedo, it's a very small box card game. It has 110 cards, and it is for 2 to 4 people. And with 2 boxes, you can extend this to 2 to 8 people. And because it is a simultaneous action game, I will tell you about how it works in a minute. But because of this simultaneous action, it actually works as an 8-player game. So we tested it in all configurations, and it still takes the same amount of time. So something like 30 to 40 minutes. So in some games that say, where we can play it up to 8. You can only really play it up to, 5 people, because otherwise the downtime between turns is so big, but it's not the case here. So that's one strength of the game, and the core mechanic is deck building, but it's not a standard deck builder. So if people expect this to be the next Dominion, then I have to disappoint them. But I think Dominion is already doing fine being Dominion, so there's no need for me to reinvent the wheel. And instead I tried to do a few things differently. So one was this simultaneous stuff that I just mentioned, and the other is that in Albedo you have different cards that are your units. So you have initially 3 different types: infantry, fighter planes, and an ace pilot. And the infantry there's two values per card. The infantry has 0 points space combat and 2 points of ground combat. And your fighter is the other way around. The fighter has 2 points of space combat and 0 points of ground combat. But one twist of the game is that you can actually rotate your card by 180 degrees, and then the fighters, or actually any spaceship in the game, gets a different loadout. So when they are in space combat fighting against other fighters, they would have some rockets, and that's why they have this space combat. But if you retrofit them for ground combat, they would get a bomb loadout or something like that, thematic, and then they would have 1 point of space combat and 1 point of ground combat. And the reason why you would want to shift these values is that every round there's 2 planets that you can attack. And each planet has 3 different locations where you can land.
Yeah. Okay.
And we secretly decide to divide our forces. Do we want to go to planet 1? Do we want to go to planet 2? Or do we want to split up and send maybe like 4 guys to planet 1 and 2 people to planet 2? And you need ground combat in order to conquer these planetary locations. So if the first planet, for instance, has 1 location that gives you 6 victory points, and 1 location that gives you, for 4 points, a new spaceship, a cruiser, then you have like 2 infantry and 4 fighters, then you could say, okay, my 2 infantry already has 4 points of ground combat, so I could get for 4 points this cruiser factory. But I can also shift my fighters so that they lose space combat, but they gain ground combat, and then I can maybe get the 6 victory points. And but because you secretly do this and then assign a navigation card that you're going to planet 1 secretly, somebody else might have a higher space combat value. Maybe they didn't shift down and they have like 4 fighters and the 2 infantry. Okay. And so they beat you in space. And then because they beat you in space, they can already cherry pick the good locations, and you only get the leftovers. So it's kind of like a bluffing game, almost a secret bid where you're bidding your space combat points to win initiative, and with the initiative you get to choose the planetary locations that give you the most benefit, and you need to spend your ground combat as kind of like the currency to buy benefits there. And that way it's also self-balancing, because if one person says I'm going here and I'm taking the victory points, then they don't improve their deck. Then somebody else at the same planet might say I cannot get the victory points anymore because the other player has them. I can now take this cruiser card and improve my deck. And then a third person might say, well, the good 2 locations are gone, but I'm still getting a consolation prize and I can streamline my deck and get rid of cards. So in later rounds, the person who has victory points initially, they might lose the space combat because they didn't improve their cards. And therefore, as I said, it's a little bit self-balancing, and this space combat is not destructive, so everybody always improves. And the last idea of this game is that in a standard deck builder, you always have twice the amount of cards than your starting hand. So in Dominion, you have 10 cards and you draw 5 of them. And in Tyrants of the Underdark, you have 12 cards and you draw 6 of them. And in Big Book of Madness, same thing. So here you draw 6 cards, but you don't have 12 in your deck, you have 9 cards in your deck. And this has 2 advantages. One advantage is that if you pick up a nice card for your deck in round 1, you can already have it in round 2, maybe, if you're lucky. But in other deck builders, you would see the card for the first time in round 3, at the earliest. So it speeds up the early game. And the other advantage is that the second round is not, you cannot calculate exactly what other people have. In other games, you know exactly, oh, they played this on the first turn, therefore the leftover cards are that, and I know exactly what they're going to do in the second turn. And this is not the case here. So that way, it makes the game faster and speeds up this uncertain, getting into this uncertain territory.
Yeah, the only thing I've ever noticed with deck builders is you can get to a point where somebody builds up so much momentum that they're pretty much kind of unstoppable if they get a kind of a good kind of starting hand pretty quickly. I play, I don't know if you play Star Realms at all, and Star Realms can sometimes hinge on your cards coming back into your kind of your hand kind of again. I think it's 5 and 10. I think you're looking at. So again, you're right. You're not starting to get your cards back until about the kind of the third round. And sometimes if somebody's lucky, they've got the ability to, they might have the option to purchase more cards for, and maybe even land a very decent kind of powerful card quite on. And then as soon as it's easier to kind of gain a momentum and build up a whole almost fleet of ships that can take kind of people out. When you were designing the game, because you've got more than just 2 players, did you have to be an awful lot more conscious of how you were kind of balancing the game? Did you make it less complicated in order to make it more easier to balance, for instance?
No, I actually started off a bit more complicated. I had not 2 values, but there was also this espionage value, and there was another purchase value where initially you would there were secret decks. Now the decks are all face up. You see exactly what you're getting. And before you had this espionage thing where you would draw 3 cards, for instance, and look at the cards and. Basically, in the playtesting sessions, I found out this is complicated, but not fun complicated. It's just an extra layer of thinking about stuff. And that's, I continuously pared it down until it was the bare minimum, where you have this initiative with the space combat and then the purchasing by essentially conquering stuff on the planets. And this balancing happen automatically due to these different locations and this consolation prize mechanic where people can always get something. And interestingly enough, this was also, I wish I could say, this is a brilliant design, but it just happened by chance that in a 2-player game you have different strategies. So in a 4-player game, you want to make sure that you get one of the unique locations that only one person can go to. So you typically consolidate your fleet. And in a 2-player game, because you're either getting victory points or you're getting a really powerful upgrade card for your deck, you can split up more often to 2 planets. And this was, I found it very interesting that this is a viable strategy. But I didn't design it to be a viable strategy. I wish I had, but this was just serendipity. So
I think that's what happens when it comes to kind of like playtesting and sometimes things like that. Sometimes somebody will just say something like, you should have 4 cards instead of 3 there, and you'll be like, that's a terrible idea. How dare you even suggest that? And then you kind of give it 2 minutes and you're like, that's really, really good. I should have thought that from the very, very beginning. But I think that's why kind of playtesting is kind of very, very important. I mean, when you've done playtesting on this, did you use the same group of people? Did you try out at different kind of groups and clubs and places like that to get kind of feedback when you did the playtesting?
Both. So I have my core group, and they're actually very good at spotting weak spots in games. So I mostly rely on them, but I also have some other groups where I go to, and it's really difficult if you don't have a core group, because people say, oh, you need to test 100 times with 100 different people. But the problem there is you're testing first impressions of a game, and it's also important that if you introduce a new thing like an expansion, that you test it with people who are actually familiar with the game and can play at a certain level where you can actually see, does this work? Is this overpowered? If you play with new people all the time, you will not find that one out. You might, by chance. There might be. There was one instance where I demoed the game after it was released, and the guy actually beat me without me playing badly. I was just playing normally, and he beat me, and I was like, oh, this is really, he's really good. He immediately picked up on the game, and but for the most part, if you have random people, then you will not get this in-depth analysis. And for me, with playtesting, for me the most important thing is not that I tick a box and say, oh, I've playtested this 100 times, this is sufficient, fine, okay, let's roll it out. But more the iterations. I'm interested in multiple iterations. And they recently playtested a game from someone else, and this was like the 70s playtest. But I'm not sure if this game has gone through enough iterations. And then you can play, if I had played this initial state with the 4 values 100 times, then I would not have received a good game. And you kind of really start this stress test playtesting once you are at a state of the game where there's no more, the iterations are more fine-tuning rather than we're scrapping complete mechanics. Mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing with playtesting as well is the ideas side of things. You get people can kind of give you ideas. I also know, unless you get other people's viewpoints, it's very easy to fall in the trap where you almost forget how to explain the game to new players for the first time, for accessibility as well, if you know what I mean. You know, I've read a lot of rule books from first time designer developers, and sometimes the rule books read very, very well, and sometimes you get the feeling that the rule book is only ever going to read very well if the designer is actually standing next to you and able to point out the bits in the rule book which don't explain themselves. And I've seen that a few times, to be honest, as well.
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting point, because I think I could have done a better job with the rule book. But what I'm doing is that because the box is so small, I only have a small bare bones rule book in it. And then I tell people you can go online and get a more extensive rulebook with more examples and stuff like that. But even that, what I really need to do, I think they did it in Root, where they have 2 rulebooks, and one is kind of like visually focused and one is text focused. And so I did a lot of text, and I think I need some more graphics to explain the concepts to people, because it is actually at its core a very simple game, but because people come with their preconceptions and it works different than what they're used to, it feels difficult to them. And I didn't do a good enough job to explain this. And I think with some pictures, it should be a lot more easy to convey these things, that you can rotate cards and that you have to have this card on top, the navigation card, to secretly show which planet you're going to. And all these points are so different about the game, but not difficult, I think, that I would need to do a better job explaining them. So yeah, I guilty as charged. I think I still have a lot to learn when it comes to rulebook writing.
I think it's a skill, and I think it's something that people like, say, Paul Grogan do very, very well, because I think it takes a particular type of mindset to not assume that the player... I used to write training manuals, and I think that you have to assume that people don't even know the most basic of the basic, and not be patronising, but also you have to... Sometimes I see rule books that automatically assume kind of people are aware of what certain mechanics mean.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think you need to think, well, if this is the only board game that's ever been invented in the world, and I'm explaining my core concept, so basically even people that have never played a game can pick up my game and play, it might make the rule book an awful lot kind of bigger, but at the same time, if it means that people can just jump in straight away and start playing, because people are quite time short. So if they spend, I know a lot of people who sit down and read through a rule book before they play, and if they're struggling with that, they'll then go and watch a kind of a playthrough video. I know a lot of people nowadays who don't even bother with a rule book, and they go straight to a kind of a playthrough video because they don't have the time to be going through a rule book and get it all kind of explained. But it's kind of I think it's a strange thing. I think they call it being too close to the coalface, where you're so used to seeing how your game works on a day-to-day basis, you forget that somebody maybe looking in from the other side is gonna kind of see it. Have you decided on prices for the Kickstarter then? How much kind of the different tiers are going to be?
Yeah, I'm so the MSRP for the base game is 19. So on Kickstarter I have it for 17, and likewise with the expansion. The first expansion was 15, and then it's 14 on Kickstarter. But this second expansion is going to be a bit bigger, and so it's more closer to the 19. But there's also in that pledge there's also the shipping rolled in, so not quite. I'm subsidizing part of the shipping, but a few euros are rolled into it, and so I think it will be something around 22 euros for that initial tier.
Okay. If people have listened along tonight and they want to keep an eye on the campaign, keep an eye on yourself, where do we find you on the interweb nets, Kai?
Mostly I'm actually on Board Game Geek. I'm in the game design forum, but mostly lurking. But there's a few threads where I'm active. Generally, BoardGameGeek.com is good to find my game. If you have any questions about the game, I get a ping there and can answer that. And on Twitter, I'm at twitter.com/Kai Herbertz, so KAIHERBERTZ or TZ, depending on whether you're listening in the UK or in the US. As I said, I now have this forwarding address, forw.de, and otherwise the game company is HESPIELE.de. That's about it. That's my internet stomping grounds.
Excellent. As normal, what we'll do is I'll take those links, I'll put them in the show notes so that we have got notes to show. Thank you very, very much for coming on. I know it's very late now because it's almost Kai turns into a pumpkin kind of time, because you're like...
Well, the hour is actually not the problem. So it's like 11:53 at the moment, but this is not the problem. The problem is that I didn't foolishly put a glass of water here. So actually I did, but it's empty now, and so yeah. I can feel my voice is starting to crack, and I was actually coughing a few times during our chat.
It's all good. It's all good.
But thanks for having me. It was really a pleasure, and I quite enjoyed it.
Good. If you've listened along tonight and you want to keep an eye on what we're up to, there's a couple of places you can find us in our worn out places, worn out faces. If you go to Google and you search for We're Not Wizards, you'll find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and our website and our blog. And yes, you'll find us there. You'll find us on the various podcast catchers that have got the name pod and the name cast in them too, except for Spotify, which has got neither, but it does have our podcast on it. You can email us, which is magic@wearenotwizards. If you want to support the show, you can support us by telling other people about us. And we also have a Patreon as well. And if you feel that you've enjoyed tonight and you want to support us with some financial monies, then feel free to become a patron through there. Otherwise, if you jump onto Apple Podcasts and if you give us a subscription, that's very, very nice. If you give us a rating, make sure you don't give us a 10 because that will make us big-headed. But don't give us a 1 because that makes us cry. Give us something in the middle, like a 5, because it's average. And we're just a little bit average. But the person who's not been average is the rather wonderful, the rather fantastic Mr. Kai Herbertz. So thank you very much again, Kai, for coming on.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time, and also really appreciate your support during the Kickstarter campaign as well. There's only 2 more things to do. The first thing is to remember that we're many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Kai?
I'm not allowed to say.
Was that a no? Please don't.
Who can really tell these days who's a wizard and not a wizard?
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, just tell me whether or not you're a wizard in German, basically, and I'll not know.
No, so, I'm not a wizard.
There you go. And the second thing is to say goodbye.
And the thing is, I would say you're not a wizard, but maybe you are a wizard and you just don't want people to know. So I don't really want to,
I definitely, if I was a wizard, I'd have it in my Twitter profile, wouldn't I?
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Basically.
Yeah,
definitely. If you look at my Twitter profile, it definitely doesn't say I'm a wizard in it at all. Near the top.
Who is in the title?
At all. Not even slightly. And the second thing is to say goodbye. So it's a goodbye from Kai. Say goodbye, Kai.
Goodbye, Kai.
And it's a goodbye from me. Remember, stay safe, roll 6s. Make something awful.fireside.fm. Check out that link for something different. And until the next time. We'll check out all the links that we give you tonight so you can go and check Albedo when it's coming out on Kickstarter, which is going to be in the next week, or even before then. But until the next time, auf Wiedersehen.
A wizard is never late. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.